Lovely to see so many people. Thank you for coming. So, yes, I've made the sort of transition from conventional medicine to less conventional medicine. So I'm just going to, I'll try and give plenty of time for you to ask questions and discussion, but I'm going to go through a few things, a little bit about me, about my biomedical background, and then awakening to a wider perspective of health and healing, working on placebos and nocebos, and then the healing stuff briefly. Okay, so a bit about me. I'm incredibly old. I qualified in 1970 at Barts in London as a doctor. I became Professor of Rheumatology in Bristol University in 1988, and I was in Bristol for a long time. I was dean there for a bit, and then still based in Bristol, I worked for the Medical Research Council. Then in 2008, I went to Exeter University to work on healing and retired from there in 2019. So for most of my working life, I've been in the NHS and the university trying to help patients with arthritis. I was a rheumatologist. That was my speciality. And I was sold on this idea of being able to cure diseases. My particular interest was osteoarthritis. And in my naivety and youthful arrogance, I actually thought my team might find ways of understanding and even curing it. So I was totally part of the biomedical game, as I now call it. I was completely enculturated into it. Now, this idea of being brainwashed into Western biomedicine is not new. It was highlighted a long time ago by Becker and colleagues who wrote this book, Boys in White, which was about the way that you take a young boy from school and you brainwash them into biomedical theory and practice. And that's what had happened to me. It's, of course, not just boys now, but when I trained, it was largely. I trained in a class of 110, which had 6 women, and only 2 men who were not white. Now, that has changed, but the way we enculturate ourselves into biomedicine really hasn't changed. It's brainwashing. And it's based totally on a materialistic paradigm. There is no room. I never heard the words soul or spirit mentioned at medical school or in my own medical experience. It's totally materialistic. It's all about Newtonian physics alone. It doesn't even incorporate more interesting concepts of physics like quantum physics. It's very, very narrow in perspective. And it believes it can find all the answers to everything. And, of course, it works up to a point. I doubt there's anybody in the room who's not been helped by Western biomedicine at some point in their lives. And we are pretty good at lots of things. We're good plumbers and carpenters. And we're quite good at many other types of disease, including many infectious diseases. But our world is not only just based in this single approach to understanding what's going on in this world, it's also terribly fragmented. So I was a rheumatologist. I knew a bit about bones and joints. I didn't know anything about people. I didn't know anything about anything else. So, that's ridiculous, really, that we just get into that very narrow mindset. And GPs these days can't really get very far into a broader set of work, even though they understand more than one part of the body. So it's terribly fragmented, and it doesn't usually consider the whole person. Now, so I was part of all that stuff and very happy in it, and all was going very well until 1990. My research group was very successful. I was being invited all over the world to talk about osteoarthritis and what to do about it. But then I got on the wrong airplane. I was on my way to Kuala Lumpur to do some teaching. And the flight refueled in Kuwait as Iraq invaded Kuwait. And I spent the next 5 months as a hostage there. Now, when I was held hostage, I had lots of unusual experiences. I'd had some spiritual experiences as a child, but like many of us, I'd kind of been beaten out of me, oh, that's just hallucinations, that's nonsense, Paul, get real. So I'd sort of forgotten about those things. But I had more spiritual experiences when I was hostage. I had a near-death experience, a shared death experience, and other things that changed me. Awoke my spirituality is one way of looking at it, I guess. I was a mess afterwards, of course, and it took me a long time to get back to anything like a normal working. But I was able to slowly change things and bring things around. But then I wanted to work on things that were more important than just simple biomedicine. But, I was in my mid-40s. I had 2 teenage daughters who wanted to go to university. My wife wasn't working. I only knew medicine and medical research, so I didn't give it up completely. I went on. I did more administrative things like being a dean, which I was incredibly bad at. But I did switch my research to caring and healing gradually. But you can't work on caring and healing in the biomedical game because the medical profession doesn't believe in things like that and won't fund any research on it. But they will just about, if you play the game successfully, fund work on placebos and nocebos. So that's where I started. So I started on these extraordinary phenomena of the placebo response and the nocebo response. What are they, you might want to ask, and I wish I knew really, because I don't. The placebo response is the benefit you get from nothing, and the nocebo effect is getting worse from nothing. And they're very, very powerful. So we usually think of them in terms of drug trials. And this is the classical kind of response you get in a drug trial, where you compare a drug with a dummy drug, which looks the same, but has got nothing in it. And the active drug, you get a fair bit of improvement, and the placebo, you get nearly as much. And if you don't treat, you get a little bit of improvement, which might be an observational effect, we don't know, but not much. And the medical profession is only interested in that bit. It's only interested in the difference between the placebo and the active, and the drug companies spend billions trying to make that a little bit bigger. And we kind of ignore this bit, which is the main bit. And I spent quite a while working on that, and it's deeply weird. There are lots of theories, but nobody understands it. I don't believe anybody understands it. And, some of the findings are really quite scary. Placebo surgery works very well. So if you say to someone, well, we're going to do this operation on your knee or your back or whatever, but we may do a sham operation, it's a trial, are you okay with this? And if they consent, what you do is the procedure is exactly the same, the anesthetic or whatever, you cut the skin in exactly the same way, you stitch it up in exactly the same way, but you don't do anything else. You don't go inside, you just make the cut in the skin. So the patient afterwards doesn't know whether they've had the procedure done or not. And many of the people who've not had the procedure done get staggeringly better. That's kind of weird, isn't it? A bit scary. And then there's nocebo responses, which I had a PhD student working with me on the nocebo, and she found some really worrying things, that a medical consultation often makes you much, much worse. Just by things people say, just by, you may not think you're saying the wrong thing, but an example that Maddie Greville-Harris, the PhD student, found was that a doctor would say, well, I can't find anything wrong with you, thinking that that was reassuring, and the patient would go out much worse because they thought the doctor said they were a fraud and they weren't feeling any pain and there was nothing wrong with them, and get much worse as a result. So we have no understanding of how these things happen at all, but they're very powerful, and they are more powerful than most of the conventional interventions we use. So we did quite a lot of work on that and had fun and got nowhere in terms of real understanding. So before I go on to healing, I just wonder if anybody wants to question me about that or disagree or whatever. It's not compulsory.
Doesn't this just confirm the power of mind?
Well, yes. Does it confirm the power of mind was the question, and I guess it does, whatever we mean by mind. Because I don't know about anybody else here, I'm not really a believer in the concept that the brain produces consciousness. Of course, the medical profession likes to think that, but I don't believe that. I think consciousness is a bigger entity, a wider thing throughout the universe, and I think that these effects are something to do with that. But I don't claim understanding. On?
German New Medicine.
Yeah.
And their point is that if you go to see a doctor, take somebody with you, take your phone and say, I'm going to record this, and the doctor will treat you differently and it will be much more positive and everything else, because otherwise they'll blurt out, you've got cancer, and you go home thinking, that's it, that's the end.
Yeah.
So I think the power of the consciousness is massive.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I absolutely agree with that. Thank you. Okay, let's talk a bit about healing. So, having done this work and sort of got my shit together, if you'll excuse the terminology, I wanted then to think about, is healing the same as the placebo response? Is it the same sort of thing, or is healing something different? And I got lucky. It's a complicated story. I won't bore you with the details, but I got lucky in 2008 when a friend of mine, who was then dean of what was the Peninsula Medical School at the time, said to me, why don't you come down and work with us? And I said, doing what? And he said, doing whatever you like. Well now, how good is that? You're aged 60 and someone says, come and work for us, we'll pay you and you can do whatever you like. He did say, perhaps a bit of teaching and a bit of help with a medical school. Well, sure. But he didn't mind he said, whatever research you want to do. He said, of course, we'll have to interview you for legal reasons. So I went to the interview and I was thinking, shall I come clean about this? I thought I really should. So at the interview I said, well, I want to do research on healing. And there was, I could sense a little bit of disquiet, but they gave me the job anyway. And in Exeter I met wonderful people who were also interested in healing, most of them not in the medical faculty. And I had a wonderful time there working on healing. So what is healing? I don't know, but why don't I let you have a think about that? Just have a moment, think what you think healing is. I've asked a lot of people this question in various ways. And when we've asked lots of people this, we find that people find it extremely difficult to say what they think healing is about, and extremely difficult to write about what healing is about. But if asked to draw what healing is about, they can do it. So the protocol we used for a lot of research was that we would give people a piece of paper and some crayons. Crayons are good. We all love crayons. And say, I want you to try and draw the first image that comes into your head when I ask you a question. Don't think about it. Don't try to analyze it. Just go with whatever picture comes into your head. And people say, well, I can't draw, but I'll give it a go. Everyone says they can't draw. I can't draw, but there we are. So then we would say, when they were ready, say, right, what does the word healing mean to you? And then images come into people's minds, and they got the images down on a bit of paper. I've got quite a lot of examples on a table outside you could look at later if you're interested in this. But it's interesting that that works. Accessing something that's not in our direct conscious mind. And I don't know whether you can see that. Oh yeah, that's not bad. So that's one of the very first ones I got from a 14-year-old girl. Hands healing with love. And quite a lot of drawings of things like that, sun shining to make things grow. Quite a lot of concepts of energy, of which that was one. That's another one of energy. And growing and flourishing of plants and animal life. All sorts of different themes. 3 sort of major underlying themes. Healings coming from some external energy source was one theme. Healing occurs through connecting with other people was another major theme. And healing comes from within and is self-healing was another major theme. I should have said this was largely done with members of the public, not healthcare professionals. There were other themes that did come through. It's about the whole world. It's not just about us humans. It's facilitated by nature and art. Some children drew sticking plasters on wounds, and a few people said it was what the medical profession did, but very few. So the general public have a very sophisticated metaphysical view of what healing is about, completely different from concepts that I get from my medical colleagues about what healing is. So healthcare professionals usually dismiss it as nonsense, particularly if they're with other medical professionals. So when I first started talking about healing to groups of colleagues, I'd get the chairman saying, well, thank you very much for that, Paul. It's pity you've gone off the rails and started talking nonsense, but we'll move on to something more interesting now. And, just dismissive. But then people would creep up to me afterwards, colleagues, and they'd sort of make sure no one was looking, and then they'd say, that's really interesting, I agree. But, they didn't want to admit it to other colleagues. So the public view amongst the medical profession is that healing's nonsense. The private view of many practitioners is that it's important and real and we should be using it. And so I found that quite an interesting issue of how my professionals deal with this subject. And a few of them actually do incorporate healing practices into their work with biomedicine. So it's an interesting kind of finding of difference between what us doctors and nurses think and what the general public think. Now, we also asked a lot of healthcare professionals at meetings, with this largely at scientific meetings in various parts of the world, where I was invited to do one thing or another, and I'd set up a stall like we got outside, if you see what I mean. And I'd just invite people totally anonymously to write down the one word that they thought most important to them in relation to healing. So why don't you have a go? If you've got a pencil and paper. If you've not had a pencil and paper, you just think of your word. So I'm just going to give you a moment. The one word that's most important to you in relation to healing. That was the question. Has to be anonymous. He's trying to tell me his word, but it needs to be anonymous. Most people got a word? Yeah, okay. So here's a word cloud of the words from healthcare professionals. So the biggest word by a long way was love. Other big ones there: acceptance, compassion, nature, balance, authenticity. Birds, I don't know why birds is up there. So the word love's never used in medicine, ever. But here it is, the biggest word. Very interesting, that, I think. I think I agree with that word. I don't know how you did. I don't know how you got on. You don't have to tell anybody. It's best not to tell anybody. So I've done quite a lot of other research on healing with through questionnaires with healers and their clients, and other sort of stuff that academics fool about doing. So it comes to the question then, what is healing? You're on tenterhooks now, aren't you? So the important thing to understand, I believe, is that it's not a thing. We live in a world where we want to take a thing and analyze it and break it down into bits and say that's what it is and define it. Can't do that with healing. It's experiential. It is like love, and it's an experience. So you can't define love, and love takes many different forms. So my love for my children is quite different from my love for my football team. My love for my football team is obviously much more important, but they're both a form of love, if you see what I mean. But they're different experiences. They're totally different, and you can't define them. Poets and songwriters, of course, spend their lives trying to tell us what love is and get some feel for it, but we don't know what it is. It's qualia, it's experience. So that makes life tricky for conventional approach to research and understanding. So what facilitates healing experiences? And I think it is about two major things. I think it's about meaningful connections principally with other living things, and I think it is about love, whatever love is. And that's very different from the curing industry that I spent the majority of my working life within, because curing is based on an idea that the body is a machine and something goes wrong with the machine and you put that right. So you have to make the diagnosis of what's gone wrong with the machine, and then you can put it right. And it's best within this way of thinking if you have specialists in the different bits. So it's just like being a car mechanic, except you have a specialist for the brakes and you have a specialist for the steering. I was a specialist in bones and joints. I didn't know about anything about the other bits of the body and what went wrong with them. But that's the way we think in medicine. That's the curing game. Make the diagnosis of what bit's gone wrong, what's gone wrong with it, and put it right. Healing, on the other hand, is experiential, and it's about transformational change for the better. And it's not just about the body as machine and the mind, it's about the soul or spirit as well. And we obviously need both. So my beef, and the reason I'm here and the reason I've written a book and stuff, is that I passionately believe that the biomedical profession needs to work with healers and embrace the concept of healing and embrace the concept of the whole person, mind, body and soul. And I think doctors and nurses need to be working alongside healers. There are some examples of this going on around, most notably in palliative care, but that sort of kind of smacks a little bit of when all else fails. But there is a bit of it there, and there's some other things going on in the world, but way too little in my view. So my conclusion I borrow from the great philosopher and writer Friedrich Capra, who I think has summarized the issue better than I can when he wrote In the process of reducing illness to disease, the attention has moved away from the whole person. By concentrating on smaller and smaller fragments of the body, modern medicine has lost sight of the human being and is no longer able to deal with the phenomenon of healing. And I agree with Fritjof Capra. So that's all I want to say. I do have some copies of the book available at a reduced price on my stand. But before we get there, please, questions, comments. I'd love to hear from you.
How do you integrate it when the whole of the medical profession has been captured commercially by the big pharma, from training all the way through to...
Yes, we have been captured by big pharma, but experienced healthcare professionals are, by and large, fairly sensible, intelligent people who've had life experiences. And so if you can connect with them and appeal to them individually, changes take place. So I think it has to be kind of bottom up. Top down's not going to work because of the control of the pharmaceutical and other industries over medicine and the political nonsense that medicine's got into. Once you get money into medicine, everything goes badly wrong. There's a great quote from, I think it was G.K. Chesterton, who said, why is it that we're surprised if we pay one man to cut the leg off of another man, we see lots of people hopping around with one leg? Once you pay people to do stuff, they do it. So, and once the pharmaceutical company get you to sell drugs, you've had it. So, but you can change individuals. So bottom up with individuals, appealing to common sense, I think, honestly.
Hi, there's a few things I wanted to kind of, they sort of all go together, but I don't think I can separate it out, if that's okay. When you were talking about the healing, in my time when I was working therapeutically, and for myself as an individual, I always felt it was really important part of whatever was going to happen was to be a witness. It always felt to me like the body needed to be heard and to be able to have its say. And in my role, I felt like I was more the witness, and then I had tools that I worked with. But actually that first part of the situation in that sort of therapeutic relationship was just to hear. And I always felt that had an important effect. Then what I also saw was the sort of what is called the healing crisis. And some people I knew couldn't go through it. And I had to really learn to respect that actually they got as far along the road as they could, because maybe there was a whole set of circumstances that the change that would come about from healing could be too much. And I heard a really helpful sentence recently, which is people often heal at the rate, they have to be able to allow the rate at which they can heal. So that time frame, in a fact that you might be seeing somebody for 6 aromatherapy treatments or something, may not always match what that person could do. So I don't know if that's making any sense, but whether you have seen through all the work that you've done this whole thing about a healing crisis. I mean, I've had my own challenges, isn't it? And there's one more thing I really wanted to acknowledge. There's such a powerful line in your book that has made such a difference to me. And it's about having a healed death, because it's always about life, but sometimes actually people need to go more healed. And I've had that recently with a friend who did not manage to overcome stage 4 cancer with every single thing they tried to do. And I was able to witness the fact that he moved, thankfully, I believe, to a more healed death, because the things that he needed to come to terms with and heal. And so actually the quality was that he had a better death than he might have done, I believe. So I'm sorry, that's a bit of a ramble, but I don't know if there's anything in there that...
A very helpful ramble, thank you. So I want to pick up on witnessing. So don't let me forget that, but I'll just deal with the dying healed bit first, if I may. So when I first started interviewing other doctors about healing, of course they were kind of self-selecting in the sense that they were people I'd come across and I knew were not completely dismissive of this. I had us academics, we have ways of doing things, but I had what's called an interview schedule. So what sort of questions am I going to ask them, and then I would record what they said and then get it transcribed and all that. So one of the questions I had for these interviews was, can you describe a patient you've worked with who you think has healed? And I was shocked to find that 2 of my first 8 interviewees described someone who was dying and dying healed. And I think it's a lovely and deeply important concept. And I wanted to do more work on it, but I got too old and ran out of money. Research money, that is. Because, doing rigorous research on this sort of stuff is expensive and tricky. But it's a wonderful topic for us to work with, and be mindful of the fact that you can die healed. Now, witnessing is absolutely what it's about, I think. So I would bracket that with my concept of connecting, making connections with other people. And I think the transformational things that can happen in medical consultations are when you have the humility and openness to just be with the other person, so that you can make that connection and witness their issues in a non-judgmental way. And when you can do that, sometimes something magical happens, which I can't put into words, but there is some magic and it's transformational. I'm embarrassed to say it's only happened to me a few times in my career, but it's magic when it does. But it does require humility of the sort that us doctors are not good at.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, about 10 years ago I had post-traumatic stress disorder, and I had a series of counselling sessions which to my mind were quite stressful in themselves. I had 6 sessions. On the 6th session I didn't go. Something impelled me to get on a bus to go to Minehead and to get in the sea. I had a paddle, and then I'd booked a session with a Reiki practitioner, and I had this session and it was absolutely transformational. I could see colours as she was treating me. My eyes were shut, I could see colours, my body changed, and I literally jumped off the bed, when she'd finished, and she had to catch me, and I couldn't believe it. And I said, I've got to learn how to do this, it's incredible. And she did. She taught me Reiki stage 1, level 1, and I went on to be transformed. I did get another job, I felt healed. But what you said about transformational is absolutely spot on. Because I went in as a cynic, I didn't even believe in it. It was like a last resort. And I love, the way that you're open-minded, you're suggesting different ways. But one thing that worries me is, how do we know that all healers are genuine? How do we know? You know, we've paid our money, we go to our session. How we've put our trust in people. How do we know that everyone is going to be ethical? And that is the problem, isn't it? Really, that is a real problem.
That's a real problem. What lovely questions. Yeah, PTSD, obviously I've been there, got the T-shirt. I don't believe PTSD is one thing. I think we use the term to describe a very wide spectrum of different responses that people have to trauma. And we put it in, we do what medicine does, we put it in a box, that's PTSD, that's a thing. It's not. It's way different people react to trauma. I tried counselling for a bit and gave up in despair very early on. I got better through a couple of other approaches to it, but it's, you know, we're all different, and what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another with PTSD, but brilliant that you found a way through it. Brilliant that I found a way through it. Now, what was the other bit I was wanting to talk about? I'm losing the plot. Something else you said.
About being ethical. How do we know?
Yeah, and how do you know whether someone's real, whether they're a healer? Excellent question. So I worked a bit with a well-known Russian lady in London who's a well-known healer for the good and the great in London. Absolutely lovely lady. And I asked her that question. I said, how do I know whether the healers I'm meeting have any real ability or whether they're just making money? And she looked at me and she said, no, you can't tell, Paul, but I can. She said, you're not sensitive enough to energy exchange to know when real energy exchanges take place. She said, I am, so I can tell. But you're probably not, most people are not. So I thought that was a very interesting answer. So I don't know how you tell. I think there are clues in the way people behave and their basic interests and how much money matters to them and a few things like that. But I think it's extremely difficult. But I think most people out there are genuine. But of course, because of the placebo effect, you know, you're gonna do good, whatever you do, if you're kind.
Hiya. I'm kind of new to healing. I've done a bit of healing on some people. I'd like to take it further, but I don't really know where to go or where to start, really. I wondered what your advice would be on how to get into it and make that break into it and have the confidence to sort of step forward with it.
Okay, thank you. Good. So there is a charity organisation which I would recommend to you called the Confederation of Healing Organisations, CHO, and I would contact them. They are an umbrella charity that helps many other charitable organisations who are involved with healing. They have a very sensible, excellent chief executive whose name I've lost in my aged brain, but I can send you more details if you want, but you'll pick them up off the web. They've got a website. They have lots of literature. They do courses. They do teaching courses. I've been on some of their teaching courses, and I think they're a good crowd. So I would start there.
Can I just ask you to elaborate on, you say you had a near-death experience when you were hostage and that changed your outlook. Could you explain that a bit more?
Yes. So I'm actually not using the terminology correctly. So when people talk about near-death experiences, they usually talk about what happens when somebody dies and then comes back to life. And this is most usually in the context of something like a heart attack, where you die for a few minutes and then you come round. And that's what's generally known as a near-death experience. And there's a huge amount of literature about that. And it's a fascinating phenomenon because people describe going somewhere else, and the descriptions are moderately uniform, independent of which country or creed or the person comes from. And they go to a place of love and light, and they may meet up with relatives, and it's all great. And when they come back, they're transformed and they're not scared of death anymore. Now that's what's generally called a near-death experience. So I'm cheating a bit because I didn't die. I thought I was with a small group of people, and we were going to be shot. And we suddenly knew that we were going to be shot dead there and then. And at that moment that I knew that, I went to that place. And I don't really know what happened after that, but I didn't get shot. Now, if something like that happens, you have to think a bit again about the world, really. The shared death one is another. Apparently shared death experiences, I'm told by some people, are quite common, but people don't talk about them because they're too scary and weird. But I'll talk about one which was scary and weird. So I was, as hostages, we were moved around various places, but at the time I was in a small flat in Kuwait with 7 other men. Yeah, enough of that. And the flat had belonged, we think, to a university lecturer. So the good news was there were some books and there were some pens and paper. So I, amongst others, started writing a diary. What do you do? And I was writing a diary one day, and I was suddenly overwhelmed by a sense of sadness and grief, which I thought was about my father. And I stopped writing the diary and never wrote in it again. So I know the exact time and date. I don't need to tell you the rest, do I? Obviously, that was the day and the time that my father died. Yeah, I'm told it's quite common. Yeah, what's that telling us about the world? So again, if you have experiences like that, you can't not know that there's more to life than body as machine. Of course, you know, I when I was hostage, it was a long time ago, so there were no telephones, there was no internet, there was no communication. So it was only 3 months later that I learned that was when my father had died.
I didn't die, but it was a complete revelation. I suppose I was in my 20s, and I'd been invited to the West Indies on a boat that I was helping people build in Devon. And I just thought, oh, great, you know, it looks like heaven over there. So packed my rucksack and off I went. And, you know, after a month, found myself in a force 10 gale. And and we had no life jackets, no nothing. It was completely ridiculous. And I was really sort of stuck out there. I couldn't get back, but I would have liked to have done. But amidst all that and amidst all the waves, I just had this sense that all these waves were a reflection of me and of how I'd felt as a child, you know, at school, in the playground, all this energy flying around, and it just seemed like a reflection of my own emotions, my own experience as a child. And I also had this strong sense of light as well. And so when I look back at it now, it was a complete revelation, and I've sort of spent my years afterwards looking and working with emotions, like you say, and it's these emotions come up, and so it's dealing with those emotions. It's as if we're sort of clearing our system out of beliefs that aren't actually true. The only truth is the light.
Beautifully said. I
Thank you.
agree.